Okay, so here we go. Okay, welcome everybody. Here I am delighted to host Dr. Eric Rosenbush, my good friend of long time nowadays, and my colleague in a book we are writing on Tibetan medicine. And Eric has devoted his life to the study of the traditional sciences of Asia, botanical treasures, ancient texts, and living transmission. He managed herb and medicine gardens in various sites in India over the last many decades. And he's also studied with masters of Tibetan, Chinese, and Ayurvedic medicines, and currently maintains a clinical practice in California. I think basically in Berkeley, I think, right? That's your main site there, and in Grass Valley.
Berkeley and Grass Valley both, yeah.
Right, right. And then he frequently teaches courses on Sowa Rigpa, and he will be teaching one in at Menla Retreat and Healing Spa in the Catskill Mountains, Phoenicia, New York, come September. And I've studied with Eric, and I have been treated by Eric. And the fact that I'm not levitating and totally healthy is not his fault. It's my failure to follow his prescription, I'm sure. He also translates medical texts from Tibetan and Sanskrit. And his teacher in Tibetan medicine is the famous Dr. Nida, who is also a teacher of mine and a wonderful person, currently on retreat, 6 month retreat from his strenuous teaching and doctoring profession. So, okay, Eric, wonderful. You also uniquely combine Chinese and Ayurvedic perspectives with Tibetan perspective, which I think is really very interesting. Can you give us, to begin with, can you tell us something about how the three of them interconnect and how it's useful in practice as well as theory?
Yeah, sure. Great. Thanks so much, Bob. So, yeah, of course, nature is one language, right? There's no separation of how nature and ecology and life functions. But us as humans, of course, we develop languages, we develop traditions, and with that we create systems.
Right.
So the medical traditions of Asia, I mean, you could say, Chinese and Indian medicine are extremely, I mean, they're massive and they're very ancient. And in the same ways, Tibetan medicine is less known, but it's also a very vast tradition. I find that Tibet is in such an interesting place, being in between India, China, and Central Asia, where it was able to absorb the medical traditions of India and then integrate aspects of the medical tradition of China as well. So I find actually that Tibetan medicine's almost the original integrated medicine, where it took really, with a foundation of indigenous Tibetan tradition as well as Indian medicine that came via Buddhism, it took a lot of aspects of ancient Greek medicine and as well as Chinese medicine, and it created this very powerful system using that.
Right, yes. I remember when I used to translate for Dr. Yishi Dundin years ago, sometimes people would come from either acupuncture tradition or Ayurvedic tradition and want to know more about the urine analysis of Tibetan medicine, which I guess came through Persia by the Galenic tradition, right?
Yeah, that is probably the dominant idea now, that urine analysis came via this Greek medicine, Greek Greco-Persian medicine. But there likely was some indigenous Tibetan element in there as well, perhaps related more to divination techniques and things like that through the urine.
That's really interesting. So how do you see this interfacing when you teach people? Who are your students usually among Westerners? And how do you see the interface of these classical traditional medicines with the what I call Well, when I'm in a bad mood, I call it industrial medicine. And I guess in a good mood, I call it biomedical medicine.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, in terms of the students that come through our courses, I mean, it's really the incredible charisma and magnetic personality of Dr. Nida that has built this amazing international organization called Sowa Rigpa, which has branches in probably
Mm-hmm.
almost 100 countries around the world.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And through that, there are so many different types of students. I mean, ranging from Western medical doctors to people in alternative medicine fields to Buddhist practitioners that have no knowledge about medicine to just general people looking to understand more about their bodies. Um, and somehow the same language works for everybody, especially in the beginning. Then there comes a point when, yeah, it might need to be the courses either become more clinically focused or more generalized or have more language specialization of one type or another. But it's amazing that at least with this basic Tibetan medical training, I mean, it's really like it's the fundamentals of just what it means to have a human body. And even if have PhDs in biochemistry and are a practicing medical doctor, still it's a different perspective. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and or likewise, if you have absolutely no medical background, we're all kind of starting at the same level in just understanding what is life. In terms of the interface with contemporary medicine, that's such a fascinating subject. And of course, the evolution of our contemporary medicine, I mean, how to say, the last 100 years, there's scientific development, but then there's also ideological, economic, socio-political influences that shape directions that research and directions that standard doctrines have evolved in. And I think right now is a very interesting time where much more than even a couple decades ago, there is so much more openness to other medical systems or other medical perspectives, and especially in younger generations of people that are learning medicine. Um, and likewise, within the fields of Asian medicine, there is a big movement towards this integrative medicine model, which
Mm-hmm.
of course, in my opinion, has a lot of problematic aspects to it as well, which we can perhaps talk about a little later too. Um, but I think in many ways, there is research that's happening, and there is, for example, in many countries in the world, you can find medical doctors practicing acupuncture. You can find acupuncture or other types of traditional Asian medical treatments present in modern hospitals. Um, Herbal medicine is a little bit more tricky because it's using substances, and people get nervous a little bit more about substances oftentimes. But if you
Mm-hmm.
look at just the body of research that's out there, I mean, there's thousands and thousands of research studies on the effects of different plants, traditional herbal compounds, and things like that, and can't argue with clear scientific data as well. So I see the future for Asian medicine as strong in that light of at least getting recognition of its efficacy and so on.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, that's great. Well, you are likely to make a big contribution to that still. I think you're young enough, you'll be able to. Let's turn a little bit back up and we can come back to some of these themes. Can you tell us a little about your own story? Like how your father was a medical doctor, I believe, and maybe grandfather, who knows? It's like a family lineage. And you then turned to this new tradition instead of conventional medical school. And that's quite fascinating, I think. So can you give us a little sort of a synopsis of your own journey?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, as you said, my dad was he was a cardiologist, and so I grew up in that world of he goes to the clinic and and there's that I had always that idea, oh, he's this guy who's doing some incredible kind of magic science that's helping people,
Mm-hmm.
and that always was nice. My grandpa wasn't a medical doctor. He was actually an economist in Germany. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and then, World War II happened. He was in the Holocaust, and then he lived through it with a very incredible story, and then came to the U.S. But he was also very scientific. So even when I was a child, they would always be instilling these principles of doing science and experimentation,
Mm-hmm.
but I think my nature was much more was looking in a little bit wider scope, and I was also very much interested in the spiritual and yogic traditions of the world,
Mm-hmm.
and it was actually a lot just in spending time in libraries and really exploring. I mean, I grew up in a very in a the outside of Chicago, in a place that was not really exposed to many things, but there were a lot of books. So
Mm-hmm.
I just dived into all the books that were in the library and
Really?
found that actually these Asian spiritual traditions and yogic traditions spoke a language that I understood. And
Uh-huh.
and then as time went on, my interest developed more. I began to meet different teachers and learn different practices and start to study languages, spend time in Asia. And
So did, was there a
slowly,
was there a
what's that?
climatic moment or something where you didn't go to graduate school, let's say, in the U.S. right away, but first went to India? When did you actually take the leap and head for India?
Um, it was in the middle of my undergraduate studies, actually. I
Uh-huh.
I decided I just needed a shift of perspective. And so, yeah, I worked for a while and saved up enough money to get myself to Asia. And yeah, and then my adventures kind
So
of
what, you were
began
around
with,
20 then, or 19,
yeah,
18, 20?
around 20, I believe, yeah.
And did your
And
parents freak out?
yes, they also, it was a time where email was very challenging. So you'd go to these like dial-up internet cafes like in Varanasi or a place like that. And I mean, it would take 15 minutes to log in, and then the power would go out, and then to make a telephone call was extremely expensive. So, they definitely didn't like the fact that I wasn't able to communicate very much. But eventually, I think they understood that I was pretty clear on this trajectory. And actually, all the things that I was studying when I was 20, I'm still studying now. I mean, I haven't really changed course much. Um,
Right.
yeah.
So did you enroll? You enrolled in an official Ayurvedic school, right? Didn't you?
So with Ayurveda, my training was a little bit different. I enrolled in Chinese medical school more
Oh,
formally, as Chinese medicine is the only Asian medical tradition that has legal recognition and has accreditation currently in the United States.
right,
So,
right. Oh, so you did that in the States. You came back and did that.
correct. Yeah, I did in San Francisco. So, I did a master's and a doctoral program in Chinese medicine. So it was about a
Uh-huh.
total of 5, 6 years of study, academic study to get
Right, right,
you
sure.
know, these things. But my training in Ayurvedic medicine has been more in organizing courses with my teachers. My late wife was an Ayurvedic practitioner, and
Mm-hmm.
so she had originally studied in the U.S. at one of the colleges here, and then over the course of time felt she really wanted to deepen her study into the deeper classical training. And
Uh-huh.
so we found our teachers, and I was able to join programs with groups of Ayurvedic practitioners. And so
Mm-hmm.
through that, I developed my relationship with my Ayurvedic teachers, who they're based in Pune in Maharashtra in India.
Uh-huh.
And and with them, we really studied the classical text in Sanskrit, and it's more of a living, active tradition. But they're also, they're also academics as well. So
Sure.
yeah, so that's a
And
little
did you run into Robert Svoboda at that time in Pune and Bombay?
No, I have not. I have not interacted with him. No, I think I believe he studied in Pune some decades
Yeah,
ago.
he was enrolled. He was the first Westerner to enroll there. I recently
Yeah.
rediscovered him, and very interesting story. Yes, but he was
Wonderful.
not overlapping with you. I guess you were a bit later because you were younger.
By some
Right,
decades, yeah.
right. Like with me. That's right. How fascinating, really. And then what was the climatic moment where you met Dr. Nida? I'm excited to hear about that one.
So I met Dr. Nida in 2006.
Uh-huh.
Well, first, I think probably in 2002 or three. So Dr. Nida is a traditional Tibetan doctor. He's from northeastern Tibet, the area of Amdo, and then he was living in Lhasa in the 90s. He was he studied English there, and in that process was invited to Italy to teach Tibetan medical courses and yogic courses in Italy. So then that began his life in Europe. So he had already been living in Europe for some years, working with the Shangsheng organization. And
Mm-hmm.
they had a center in Berkeley where
Mm-hmm.
I was living at the time. And so I remember that he was scheduled to teach a course there around maybe 2002 or 3, which unfortunately had to get canceled. But I knew from the description that he was from an area called Repkong. And
Right.
my principal Dharma teacher, actually 2 of my important Dharma teachers were from that town,
Oh.
which is a very important town in northeastern Tibet, especially for this yogi tradition, the Ngakpa tradition.
Mm-hmm.
So finally in 2006, when the circumstances aligned for me to be able to travel to Tibet for the first time and to China for the first time, I got Dr. Nida's email, and I sent him a mail because I knew he was from Repkong. And I
Yeah.
was actually just asking his advice of, places to visit, to, meet some lamas or some
Right.
doctors or some places to
Right.
study. And he, surprisingly, he wrote me back and he said, "Oh, I'm there right now. I'll pick you up at the train station on this and this day." Um,
Oh, good.
and so then, I come up. I was actually, yeah, I took the train up from Yunnan and Sichuan, and then went to Qinghai to Amdo. And so they picked me up, and Nida always jokes that he was shocked because he thought that my name was Erica, and that he didn't know English names that well, I guess, and he thought that I was an American woman. And so he was very excited to welcome this American woman to Amdo. He was like, "What? Who is this like scruffy, scruffy guy?" That's what he always says. He always jokes about that. But yeah, then I spent a few weeks with him in Amdo, in his hometown in Malo. Um, it was actually around the time when his father was sick and was in the process of passing. So he
Oh
had been
dear.
in Europe for a long time, but he happened to then just be staying in Amdo.
I
And
see. I see. Did they
yeah, and
do
then
the
he took me
the, the
around and
Shidro?
introduced me to different
Did they do
people.
the
And
Shidro festival at that time when you were there?
you
The
know,
Bardo festival?
I left. I was not there at that time of year. But yeah, no, that tradition has been going on for quite some time. It's a big gathering of yogis who do the ceremony of the Tibetan Book of the Dead, and oh, it's
That's
a
great.
really incredible. It just happened pretty recently. Um, but yeah, so then from there, my relationship with Dr. Nida kind of evolved. I brought him to the U.S. for the first time, and yeah, the end of 2016, and then at that time he was a little less busy. So, we were
Right.
able to bring him a couple times a year and, spend quite a bit of time with him for quite a number of years.
Wonderful, man. I love the guy. I really fell in love with him the minute I met him. When you brought
Yeah.
him actually to Menla, right? And it was just wonderful. He came rushing up about how at Menla he's a geomancy expert also, right?
Yeah,
So he
exactly.
knows about feng shui and this kind of thing. And he said you have a turtle in the north, and you have a white tiger in the east, and you have a dragon in the south. You have a Garuda in the West, and he really set up well here. It's a wonderful, blah, blah. And it was just so sweet, really. It was a marvelous man. And
Yeah.
now but you also teach very much on your own. You set up this school in Nepal to train actual Tibetan doctors. So what are you going to be
Yeah.
teaching
So
this fall? How are you going to do it? I just want to say my own study of Tibetan medicine has been absolutely paltry compared to yours. And really, I was ordered by my guru to study it with Yishidanda in the 60s, so maybe before you were born,
mm,
I think by some decade. And and I was completely resistant. I didn't want to. I wanted to meditate and realize emptiness and all this kind of thing.
yeah.
But he made me do it, and then I got into it. And actually, that was also after my halfway or three-quarters of the way through college. At that time when I was trying to be a monk, and for the first time, therefore, after all supposedly good schools, Western schools, best kind of education in America, supposedly, if I had properly studied, it would have been maybe. And I had no idea about my liver, my kidney, my heart, my lung. I didn't know what was going on in there. I paid no attention to my own body. And to me, it was a revelation about like what the organs and the vessels and the terminology and the Tibetan medical way of seeing things,
Yeah. Sure.
and also of course connecting very much to the whole idea of compassion, and therefore very much giving a deeper insight into the compassion nature of Tibetan culture. So are you going to be,
Mm.
when you deal with people who are complete greenhorns, so to speak, I guess you get into that, do you? Or tell us how you're going to be handling
Yeah.
ignorant young Westerners like I was
Sure.
in this, although
Yeah.
there'll
No.
probably be a mixed audience. I imagine there'll be a mixed, you'll be teaching some complementary professionals as well, usually, right? In that kind of course, you
Yeah,
get that.
yeah, typically it's pretty mixed, especially with this introductory class. So what
Mm-hmm.
this course is it's a 30-hour course, and it's it's the basic course that's offered in various configurations in all of the Sorik Kong centers around the world. So
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
it's kind of like the introduction, or the door that opens you into this world of Sowa
Mm-hmm.
Rigpa, of Tibetan medicine. And the basis of the class is something called the Tsagyu, or the Root Tantra, which is
Mm-hmm.
it's a very special text in the Tibetan medical tradition, because it's very short. It's only 10, 15 pages long,
Mm-hmm.
but yet it's the seed of the entire system of Tibetan medicine.
Right.
So it's extremely profound, yet it's extremely simple. So in that, it's a perfect kind of framework to introduce the principles of the medicine for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
I think of it kind of like it's a different type of owner's manual for being incarnated in a human body. And learning the basic dynamics of, these are the ways we stay in balance. These are the ways we can go out of balance. And here's the basic principles of how to understand that.
Uh-huh.
So how the course works is we study 3 trees, actually. And that's this beautiful system developed in Tibet, where they design these trees. They're like a living outline of the whole system. So every
Mm-hmm.
principle will have a trunk with branches and leaves, and in understanding how these trees are structured, we understand about our body, what makes us sick, all the different aspects of how sickness occurs and moves in the
Mm-hmm.
body, what our body tissues are, our bodily organs, our constitution, and so on. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and then there's a tree of diagnosis, which is how we can learn, for example, to look at our own tongues, to look at our urine, symptoms, pulse analysis, on a very simple, basic level that
Mm-hmm.
we can all use, which would be the foundation of learning the actual clinical practice.
Mm-hmm.
But it's also something very simple that we can all tap into. And then
Right.
finally, the most useful part is the therapeutics. So in Tibetan medicine, we have four basic types of therapies we use. Using diet, using food, lifestyle, which can include basically everything that we do, herbal medicine, and then external therapies, which is also a full spectrum from massage to acupuncture, moxibustion, and so on. So so this course is a very general introduction to how Tibetan medicine sees all of that.
It's wonderful.
Yeah,
Wonderful. Well, I can certainly testify. I did memorize that Root Tantra.
wonderful.
I did, but 60 years ago. So it's not too fresh in my mind. But I did do it, and I passed the test of the labeling all the leaves on the trees, I think. What, 227, 200, what was it? I can't even remember the number.
Yeah.
Was it 227? Is that still the right number? Yes?
I believe
Really?
so, yeah.
Yeah. And I memorized, because I passed that test. And I did not go on to be a physician, but what I can say is that it completely changed my life. And and it definitely changed the way I experienced being in a body, a human body.
Yeah.
And when I looked at others, and my children, my family, how they were, and looking at their bodies and their lifestyle and the whole thing. And of course, not to mention the very core thing, which is the core of Tibetan medicine, which is the centrality of compassion and the cultivation of compassion and everything, which maybe was, I think my teacher, who was very, had a lot of precognition, it was very prophetic about my life. I considered him, the Geshe Wangyal, Dunjilin and Sendimete, as they say. He predicted so many things that happened in my life that have come true, that he forced me, or made me do it, I think, because he saw how it would improve my life, and it definitely changed my life. And so I can recommend it from personal experience, that it had that effect, even though I wasn't going on. And of course, someone who has a medical professional, East, West, modern, ancient, whatever, outlook or ambition, I can't think of how excellent it would be for them.
Yeah, no,
Can't even
it's
put it in
really amazing like that. And it's a thing that I find oftentimes people are reluctant to jump into a completely new system, or a completely new complicated way of looking at things, and that's sometimes even more so for medical practitioners. And I find that actually, especially this course on the Root Tantra, or on this Tibetan medicine intro, it's simple enough where it's just a different perspective on what we already see. And I find, for me, that's actually, how to say, the treating of patients is just a bonus to understanding this view of how life works, and how nature works, and how the five elements work, and how the different energies in our bodies work. And it's something it's experiential. It's not just something you read in a book and you memorize some lists. It's actually, it's something that you become aware of aspects of your own experience. And I find that is one of the most satisfying things about working with this and sharing it as well.
Right. That's tremendous. And you've taught it many times, I think, right? So you have a very good approach. You have a very good curriculum, so to speak, that you can follow with to elucidate the Root Tantra in contemporary terms. If I'm not, I should take it myself before.
I've been working with this material for quite some time, and every time I present it, it's a little bit different. But yeah, it's definitely it's fun. It's a good opportunity to really just look at reality and look at life, and to try to understand who we are and what our life and the dynamics of our life means.
That's really great. Now, let me ask you another thing about it, which I'm very interested about, and I know now the Root Tantra, the four Tantra system, it was created by You took the younger, I think, right? That is the usual historical idea in the 13th century. Is that right? 12th and 13th centuries. The younger you took
Yeah,
Yonten, right? And
that
but in the Root Tantra, it's constantly referring to the Ashtanga Hridaya of Sanskrit. But then, and that is said to be by Vagbhata, right?
mm,
But from I believe your view is, which I think is unlike me, I think you have the correct scholarly view, is that the Vagbhata version, the Indian version, did not have the same structure organization as the Root Tantra, so that is a definite Tibetan innovation. Is that correct?
okay. So I think the tricky thing is this idea of Yenla Gepa, right? The Ashtanga, the eight
Yes.
branches.
Yes.
Um,
Yalatyeva. Right.
so there is a text called The Heart of the Eight Branches, which
Right.
is a mid first millennium AD Indian text that extremely influential, one of the most influential works of Indian medicine. Perhaps you could say the most influential because it was translated to Persian, Latin, translated to Tibetan in the 10th
Really?
century.
Into Latin? I didn't know that.
I believe so, and we could edit that out if I
No, that's okay.
if
No,
I
I
made
mean
that
it's all right. It doesn't matter.
up.
But that's
um,
exciting. I didn't. I had no. I'd never heard that. Persian, sure.
yeah, the Ashtanga Hridaya.
Hmm.
So if you look at Indian medicine, first there was this, there's what's called the Brihatrayi, the three important books, the Charaka Samhita, Sushruta Samhita, and Ashtanga Hridaya. And Charaka Samhita is
I see.
very
It's up
large.
there with the Ashtanga Hridaya. I see. I mean, with the
Yeah.
Charaka Samhita. Wow. Okay.
And Charaka is very old and it's very big, and its structure is very. It's actually this incredible structure, but it's hard to make sense of the structure sometimes. It takes a lot of understanding to really understand how it's structured. And what Vagbhata did in creating the Ashtanga Hridaya was he took the elements of Charaka and that he really synthesized it into beautiful Sanskrit verse. And
Uh
it's
huh.
very terse, it's a little less of a philosophical exposition than you find in Charaka, but it's very it's extremely practical, clear, and in beautiful poetic Sanskrit. So
Hmm.
then it became the third of the most important Ayurvedic texts.
Right. Right.
Um, and then so also the story of Vagbhata was that by some accounts he was a Brahmin by birth and then became a Buddhist. So
Hmm.
his tradition also is very much linked to the tradition of Indian Buddhist medicine, and
Right.
that tradition was also very strong in Kashmir, in 9th, 10th, 11th century, when a lot of manuscripts and masters went to Tibet in this great translation movement with Rinchen Sangpo and so on.
Right.
So
Right.
therefore, there's a few of the commentaries and the Tengyur and the Tibetan canon, and and this Ashtanga Hridaya became translated and very influential in Tibetan medicine
Right.
in 10th, 11th century. So then Yutok in the 12th century, um, you know, the story is that there was a version of these four tantras that was existing in Tibet that was brought earlier by the great translator Vairocana.
Aha. For
And there's
tantra
all
in Indian language, in Sanskrit, in other words.
so that is the story. But there's been,
Right.
and it was then hidden as a terma, as a hidden treasure in Samye
Yes.
monastery in a pillar. And then
Yes.
this
Right.
great Tibetan yogi, Drapma Ngonshe, retrieved it, had a vision to retrieve this four tantras, and then it got passed on to the Yutok family. So that's the story. Historians debate over it, and I think it's only speculation to know whether or not there was a Sanskrit manuscript called the Four Tantras. We know
Right.
that right now we don't have one,
Yeah.
and
Well, we don't have one
that
at the moment. It might be in a pillar.
exactly one day we'll bulldoze a pillar and we'll find it. We'll be like, oh, they were right all along.
Right.
But if you look at this Ashtanga Hridaya, there are a lot of elements in it that are virtually identical to the Four Tantras.
Yes.
Of course, the Four Tantras expands on that a lot, and the Four Tantras restructures and reorganizes and then adds a lot of additional elements, and then the herbs that are used are more specific to the Tibetan plateau. There's
Right.
more pulse gnosis. There's a lot of things that developed from that. But
Right.
from my perspective, this Ashtanga Hridaya is a very important a very important source or a very important text to understand Tibetan medicine.
Right. Right. So here's it. May I speculate for a second? I have this
Sure.
idea, because of His Holiness the Dalai Lama's fourth aim in life of bringing back to India. It's the fullest dimension of India's own, what they themselves called inner science, Adhyatma Vidya, Nangi Rigpa.
Yeah.
And that and the medicine is the first of the outer sciences, so the bridge between the inner science and the outer science, the sort of enlightenment, liberation seeking science and the outer science. And so if you look at, and I didn't ever know, you just now informed me, I learned now this minute from you, that the Vagbhata work of the 8-branch essence, or heart, was one of the 3 top Ayurvedic things in the Brahminical tradition. So that strengthens my speculation that the aspect that the Tibetan version shows how this comes straight out of the Buddha's heart and even his whole nervous system, you could say. The medicine Buddha, the idea of the medicine Buddha being a healing engine and his nervous system irradiating these different tantras, the heart chakra, throat chakra, brain chakra, navel chakra, etc. And so the Brahmins needing and using this wonderful thing, especially once the Buddhist libraries were all burned by outside invaders, and the main repositories of text were massively burned, then they would not like the idea that this thing that's connecting with their gods, the Brahminical things, like Charaka Samhita and Sushruta Samhita, etc., they wouldn't like them suddenly being presented as emerging from the Buddha. Do you know what I mean? In too graphic a way. And even I'm sure they argue that Vagbhata wasn't really a Buddhist, and that's just some later people saying it, because they got so much after the loss of Buddhism in India in the 11th century and 12th century, they got very much into sort of wiping out its traces, if you could say. It was just a side thing. It was never a real Brahminical thing because of Buddhism disliking the caste system. And so, and then second, the Tibetans would have a motive maybe after Yutokan Tengompo. They would, not him, but after him, some of them might have a motive to want to say, well, this is our thing, after they're sort of more remote from the translation period, where they saw India as the source of all, and the Buddha as all the source of everything, they got into more, this is their own revelation. Do you know what I mean? So between those 2 motives of all the scholars involved, we can still hold out hope that this is an ancient Buddhist contribution, even in Indian culture, and the way that it comes out of even the definition in the 4 tantras that health is actually enlightenment, finally. And ultimately it's a balance of potential diseases and ills and things that cause suffering of the ordinary unenlightened person, but that still can be healthy because Buddha never said the unenlightened life was not worth living. He wanted to make it livable so that they could become enlightened. So this is my speculation, and I think you maybe don't agree with me, but maybe you'll think about it. What do you think?
How to say it? I think in every time, in every place, in every culture, there are people that want to really assert their own group or tribe or sect's superiority over others.
Right.
And then there are those that are less motivated, that have that as less of a motivating factor.
Right.
So of course, I think both within the Indian tradition as well as in the tradition, for sure you'll find elements of that. I think in the case of the Ashtanga Hridaya, the essence of the 8 branches, it is so clearly a syncretic text. I mean, so it was written in the Gupta period, mid to late first millennium AD, and it was a time where Buddhism and Hinduism were really coexisting as Indian systems of thought and belief and so on. So in the Ashtanga Hridaya, I mean, there's actually 2 versions. There's a longer version and there's a shorter version. There are prayers to the medicine Buddha. There are very clear Buddhist mantras, Buddhist prayers inside. Yeah. And there are also prayers and references to Vedic type of practices as well.
Right.
So, I think it's important to note that in the world of what you can say these sciences or outer sciences, perhaps sectarian divisions are less important, or were less important at that point in time. Within contemporary scholarship of Ashtanga Hridaya, I mean, I've not heard of people trying to refute the idea that that Vagbhata was a Buddhist. I mean, that's part of the lore of his life, and there's, I believe, pretty clear scriptural attestations to that. And the place where it's really strong, for example, in Kerala. In Kerala, there's a lot of people that really just follow the Ashtanga Hridaya tradition. I'd love to. I haven't had the.
Oh, really? How cool! Really, Kerala? Oh.
Yeah, and in other parts of India as well. I mean, in the what became the standardized Ayurvedic curriculum, Ashtanga Hridaya is a very important part of learning the principles of Indian medicine.
Right.
So.
But well, let me ask one question. Then in the 3 main what do you say? Well, doshas. How are we going to translate? It's humor. We say humor, but I don't think that's really correct. But anyway, let's say the 3 humors then, and their alignment with the 3 poisons of Buddhism, right? Desire, hatred, and delusion or ignorance, with the vayu, with wind, bile, and phlegm. And is that in the Sushruta Samhita and the Charaka Samhita in that clear and completely graphic a manner?
Not to my knowledge in that kind of systematic way.
But
you do find, I mean, there's, the 3 poisons or 5 poisons doctrine. You do find also references to that. I mean, even in yogic literature in India and things as well. As are the 4 immeasurables, the Brahma Viharas, and I mean, it was there was a lot of cross pollination. When different people share land and language and so on.
Sure.
Sushruta Samhita is a fascinating one, which is the second of the important 3 Ayurvedic texts, because the Sushruta Samhita was actually redacted by Nagarjuna. So,
really?
in contemporary Ayurvedic understanding, there is a great reverence. I mean, Nagarjuna is really considered the founder of Indian alchemy, at least in the human level. So I don't see necessarily that much sectarianism from my perspective and my experience, but I'm sure it exists. I mean, people.
Well, for example, tell me this: is the Nagarjuna texts, medical texts that we have in the Tibetan canon? Are there current Sanskrit versions that the Ayurvedic people in India who don't know that much about Tibet, let's say, I mean, I'm not putting them down for that. They just don't, because there's been only recent interconnection again. But are there versions that circulate and are published in India that people read of those books, or are they lost?
So of the Nagarjuna texts in medical texts in the Tengyur, in the Buddhist canon. There's one
Right.
called the Jiva Sutra. There's one called the Yoga Shataka. I
Uh-huh.
believe those are the two important ones in the medicine division.
Right.
The Yoga Shataka, I believe one Indian scholar, Bhagwan Das, he
Yes.
attempted to translate it back from the
I
Tibetan
see. Okay, because it didn't exist. Right,
Um,
but he did do that. Okay.
the Jiva Sutra, I believe that's what it's called. There may be a Sanskrit version. I'd have to double check, and
Right. Right.
we'd have to
Wow.
edit
Well.
this after I double
Well.
check.
Right. 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 That is so interesting, Eric. Really, you're so
Yeah,
learned.
but
You're teaching me these things. So the Sushruta was organized by Nagarjuna. That is incredible to me. I'm
yeah,
amazed.
but interestingly enough, there is no Sushruta Samhita in Tibetan.
There's no Tibetan translation of the Sushruta Samhita. Really?
Correct. Not that I've ever seen. I mean, of course, so much was lost, right? But in
Of course.
terms
Of
of
course.
the important medical texts, really, there is even no Charaka Samhita that I'm aware of. There's some references to verses in Charaka, but
Yes.
Charaka Samhita is a really big book, and I
Yes. Yes.
think
I have looked at
in that
that.
early, what's that?
Yeah. Well, I said I have looked at that. Well, we need a project. You must help us organize a project. And over the many decades that I've been working on these things, I have had inquiries from donors, patrons, or I would support a translation of all the medical texts, blah, blah, blah. But I've never had either the people able to do it or the organizational structure to be able to even receive it. And so somehow they petered out, and of course one never knows. Sometimes people want to do something and they don't follow through. So, but I'm saying I think it's a very organizable thing to create
Great.
such a thing in the coming years before I croak,
Wonderful.
hopefully, if I can stay at least a little longer. And I really want to do it, and I would really look to you to help do that because I think you're one of the most important young authorities. And why do I say that? Well, there are people like Kenneth Zisk and others who have written about Ayurveda and blah, blah, who are in academia. But the point is, you are in clinical yourselves, and you also know the languages, but you are not stuck in having to do this and that academically. And so in the waste of time that people make you do when you're in academia, working on some historical issues and things. And so I think you're a great hope in this in the future. In addition, of course, to healing people and to your life, I can see that in the future, and I'd really like to. So I'm planting this as an intention and a prayer
Oh,
that we think
thank
about
you.
doing this. And
Thank you. Yeah.
I would wager that the vision of the medicine teaching coming out of the Buddha's sort of presence in the universe there's a version in India more close to Utokyan Tengompo Jr.'s version than the existing Ashtanga Hridaya that is sort of, as you say, syncretic, wanting to fit in with the Brahmins. Because the Gupta era, mid first millennium, was yes a time of the syncretic connection of Buddhism and Hinduism, so to speak, although Vaishnavism and Shaivism, that is to say, mainly. But on the other hand, it was when the Vaishnavism and Shaivism side was kind of asserting itself in a very strong way, because I think there was a long phase during the Kushan period of political rule, but a long phase from the time of Nagarjuna to then, about 4 or 5 centuries, where most of the really high-level Brahmins were in the Buddhist academic institutions, and
Yeah.
the Indian kings were not necessarily creating the patronage to have schools around their ministries. They had Brahmins working for their ministries, Ministry of Education, of Military Affairs, of Agriculture, etc. But they didn't really keep schools of poetics and stuff. They left that to the Buddhist universities. And so a lot of the really top intellectual Brahmins, I think, worked as Buddhists. There's a huge thing you see in every field, like the logic field, Vaisheshika or Vedanta, where they hark back to sutras made almost in Buddha's time or a little after Buddha, and then they refer to commentaries but there's no text that anybody else knows and no author, because it seems that all of the growing authors, Sangha, Vasubandhu, these kind of people they were Brahmins too, but they were working in the Buddhist schools. And like they were going to the Harvard of the time, or the Oxford of the time, which were the Buddhist universities. So Gupta's where so Vagbhata, there could have been, in other words, a precedent to Vagbhata, like his grandfather or great-grandfather, who might have had such a text that inspired Vagbhata to pull together the Brahminical things that were acceptable to the more Vedist-oriented people, and yet kept the principles going through that, and that the models that then the Tibetans retrieve or recreate from meeting the Buddha in meditation, let's say, or whatever. There may have been Indian versions of it. Anyway, that's the hope of my fantasy.
Yeah, I mean, it is surely a possibility that, the four tantras, that we'll find some other manuscripts relating to it. But also from my perspective is that doesn't really matter. Dr. Nida's teacher, his name was Khenpo Chodrutsenam, and he was one of, possibly the greatest Tibetan doctor that stayed in Tibet in the 20th century. Who really revived the tradition of Tibetan
He was at
medicine.
Lhasa Menzies, I think, right?
Yeah, and he basically revived Tibetan medicine after the end of the Cultural Revolution. When China started to open back up to these kinds
he
of
treated
things,
me once.
Oh, wonderful.
I had a treatment from him.
Wonderful.
He burned the living kibasa out of my knee after taunting me that I probably couldn't take it, so he couldn't do something that I really needed and really helpful to me. And he would give me some medicine. And I said, no, I can take it. Because I was desperate leading a hiking group around Mount Kailash. On my way, my knee completely went out in the most horrible way. And I was limping, crutching. It was really bad. And so he put this thing on the knee, underneath nearby the kneecap, but a little below it. This herb, and burned it right on the skin. And I was howling, as he predicted. And I was practically wanting to scrape it off, but I restrained myself. And actually, it fixed the knee, bang, and I was hiking, like really amazing. I couldn't believe it. I read about it in the book, but I was not believing it.
So that's traditional Tibetan moxibustion.
Yes.
That's the original type of moxibustion, which is
that's
very
the
strong.
rough stuff.
Which, these days in the West, even in India, people will often do more gently. But, for people with strong bodies and who are able to tolerate it, it can be so effective. It can be
it's terrible. It was terrible, but it actually worked. On the other hand, it worked.
Yeah.
Pain,
exactly.
That's part of the knowledge. Pain sends signals throughout the nervous system in the body and draws enzymes and draws I don't know what all, and all kinds of new cells, stem cells maybe, and things, and suddenly rebuild things in a rapid manner. That when we constantly anesthetize ourselves, we then take long, slow things or never really recover. Anyway,
Hold
this is so wonderful to talk. Yes, sure.
Just 1 second, I have to plug my computer in.
I'm sorry, I'm overtaxing your time.
No,
I'm afraid.
If anything,
it's the other way around.
What happened?
in his laptop so it has battery.
Oh dear. What do you? I don't know what happened. What happened, Justin? You can cut this.
Yeah, cut this out. He's just unplugging in his computer so he doesn't run on a battery.
Ah, I see.
Great conversation.
It is.
Excessively technical for the people wanting to join a basic course.
I know. No, I know. You're doing the introductory thing, but you know, I am I am studying with you in this interview and nudging my teacher. Nudging, I'm studying with you in this interview, nudging my teacher toward my own, wish fulfilling, what do you call it?
That's so
wi-
embarrassing.
What? No, no, no. I am, but no, it is not at all embarrassing. You are really knowledgeable in these things, and you have really studied way past. In fact, I was going to ask you, like, I've been trying to get a full text of the long and short Ashtanga Hridaya, and I don't find it on the net, and I don't find it on Amazon. I don't know where you can find it. Maybe only in India. I gather that you.
It's published in India. I mean, I've got it right there on my bookshelf.
Right, I'm sure. And but I'd like to look at it. And then I have never tried to read Nagarjuna's Tibetan Yoga Shataka, and I didn't know about this Jiva Sutra. You say it's called, and I'm salivating to think about it. I'm going to look it up, and
Yeah.
but I don't have time at the moment to probably do a lot with it. But in the book
Yeah.
we're doing, these issues I think are very doable, and your introduction of the basic thing in the way you do it is I think I hope you use elements of it in your session, because I know
Yeah.
from past students of yours at Menla anyway that they've been very happy what they've learned from you, and they really felt they got something, just like I learned a couple of things this time. I'm so flipped out. I never knew that Ashtanga Hridaya, somehow nobody ever said that I read or anything, was in the top three. And
Yeah.
there's a huge Buddhist contribution if he was a Buddhist, and it seems that he
Yeah.
was. So it's like Gaudapada in the context of Vedanta that also gets neglected, you know? Where
Yeah. Sure.
Gaudapada, the Vedanta people think they're very not Buddhist, but actually Gaudapada writes, saluting Badarayana, the author of the Brahma Sutra and the Upanishads, and saluting Buddha, as and syncretically feeling fine, embracing both of them, in a proper
Yeah.
Brahmin that he was, Gaudapada, and he's the
Yeah.
he's like three generations before Shankaracharya, who doesn't really
Exactly.
give the Buddhists the same level, because by that time the culture has turned, where there's the competitive thing is going, but that's good too. The competitive thing, it brought out a lot of great things, because it's like a debate. It's like Dharma combat or something. It's very in Zen. It's very useful.
Yeah. Sure. Definitely. Actually, if I could just add one thing that maybe we
Please,
could
please.
just and splice in
Yes.
to the thing before. Just all right. So in the context of the four tantras, as finding we can find in possibly an Indian source of the four tantras, and of course that would validate its being Indian.
Aha.
But if you look at the Tibetan literature, even Khenpo Chödrön Tsenam, Dr. Nida's, he has the idea that the four tantras, we can see it as Kama, Terma, and Dakna, which is a very Nyingma kind of thing, right? That it's like the Kama tradition.
Yes.
Like there was actually a text that would have been passed on. And then it's
Right.
also it's a hidden treasure, in the sense that, it was brought to Tibet, hidden in the pillar, recovered by the great yogi Trapang Ngonshe, and so on.
Yeah.
Right? But it's also, and I think most importantly, in my view, is a pure vision. So, Yutok Yunten Gompo, not very much in discussion. Master. He was a great Dharma practitioner, as well as an incredible doctor. And, he was said to have traveled by foot. He went to India many times. He went to China, and learned medicine, met all of these great doctors, had transcendent kind of visions, and so on.
Yes.
And, to say that our version of the four tantras was Yutok's revelatory vision doesn't make it any less valid.
Right, I agree.
And
but
in terms of the intersection between, as you were talking about, Bob, this like the spiritual science, the Adhyatma Vidya, the inner science, and
Uh-huh.
these outer sciences like medicine and so on. From my perspective, Yutok did this incredible service of really teaching both together, where
Uh-huh.
the four tantras, they are very much a medical text. There's
Uh-huh.
some dharmic kind of elements in it, but it's very clear, this is a disease, this is how you treat it. There's aspects of Buddhism, but it's a medical shastra, it's a medical text. And then his
Yeah.
other book, the Yutok Ningtik, is this inner meditation practice that healers or doctors can do to learn to have their practice of medicine connect to their spiritual path and to
Right.
develop
Right.
these qualities within themselves and to awaken
Absolutely.
the four tantras and to
Absolutely.
awaken the medicine inside themselves and so on.
Right.
So I see it as, this, because the four tantras are an expression of the wisdom of medicine Buddha, and it's
Yes.
through Yutok that came. So whether or not a palm leaf manuscript ever comes that is the four tantras or not, to me it doesn't give any less validity to the text and transmission that we have.
Right. Right. Well, I don't listen. I'm also not saying, by the way, just let me make clear, I'm not saying that I'm interested in that Indian origin or seed, let's say, in order to validate the Tibetan revelation of Yutok Yende Gompo. I consider Yutok Yende Gompo like my guru, and I was initiated by Yeshidanda initially, although I didn't practice well, but I don't practice anything well. I'm a lazy West American scholar. But so it's nothing to do with validating it in a sort of Buddhist sense. I think it's extremely and totally valid, and it's one of the great human contributions is that thing. But the interest in finding that original thing is interconnecting the Buddhist side of Indian culture in India's own history, because India so much lost that culture. And your thing about Dharma, I totally agree. If you will, the entire Mahayana is Dharma.
Yeah.
All the
Right.
massive Mahayana sutras are all treasure texts, because they were hidden from the sort of really fundamental Buddhist level. They're all treasure texts because Buddha taught them. They were hidden with the Nagas, whatever that means, and Nagarjuna recovered them. They gave them back for Nagarjuna to spread them in India, and he did it for a reason, that the Indians needed to establish the monastic institutions and the universities first before he wanted to do non-dualism, so it wouldn't be confused with monism, to just put it in a very short form, and then thereby not disrupt the caste system, which he was concerned to disrupt. So by saying it's all one, but you still have to clean mileage free, sort of routine. He didn't want non-dualism to be confused like that. So.
Yeah.
So that's my interest in it, not at all as a question of validation or non-validation. Although I must say that Yutok Yende Gompo himself, in the text, it gives a Sanskrit, original title, and then his title is a Tibetan translation of that title. And then some purists who were trying to reject Tibetan learning, they could say, well, if there's no original, then he's faking there, putting Sanskrit title to try to achieve legitimacy and power. All the way people try to disrupt, or they try to be nasty about every spiritual person's creation and contradiction. They would say that, but I no way would say that. I would say that whatever Vairochana had there, put in whatever pillar, whatever Dharma she picked out, Yutok had something accessible, which may not be exactly what he gave in Tibetan, but helped him rise to that vision, sort of thing. And I would argue that against someone who would try to say, why is he putting a Sanskrit there, to accept as some kind of convention? I would say, well, he had a Sanskrit, And there's another.
Sure.
In other words, there's another Vagbhata work that he had that has been lost in the Sanskrit stream in India. Is what I would want to argue, And that was his inspiration, in addition to his yogic attainment of being a second Buddha. There's been a lot of second Buddhas, and he's one of them, for sure. You talk.
I mean, and actually, speaking of that, Babla, in the Tengyur, there is a text which is Vagbhata's auto commentary to the 8 branches, which is
Oh,
something that
really?
no longer exists in Sanskrit. Yeah. So that's a
Oh,
fascinating one to look at also.
oh, that
It's
could
called
be.
the Vaidurya Bhashika, like the words of Vaidurya.
Vaidurya Mashika? Oh, the sapphire? Or do people still insist on translating lapis?
I just say Vaidurya. That's a whole other. That's a whole other.
I I insist it has to be sapphire because it has to be a beryl, which therefore is translucent. It's not completely opaque, you know. But anyway, never
Well,
mind.
and
That's a minor
actually, it
point.
should be a star sapphire, a
Yeah,
sapphire that has that like a iridescence in it.
yeah, sure. I'll go with
So,
that.
but yeah, Vaidurya is a word that has many different connotations for sure. That's a
I
whole
know,
other.
I know. But I don't like lapis for it because it's completely opaque. Well,
No,
listen, it's been
lapis,
wonderful.
lapis surely.
Yes.
Yeah.
So when does the course start, Eric?
Yes, so this course is so it's offered online. It's going to be 2 days a week for the whole month of September.
Oh,
Um,
great.
and I believe it's possible. I mean, it's ideal to join it live, but I believe it's possible to do it as a to start in the middle and catch up, or to do it as a distance learning through
Oh,
recording.
wonderful. I see. So you won't be coming, we won't have the pleasure of hosting you at Menla for a hybrid. And so you'll be
I
teaching
may
from
I
Berkeley.
may be I may happen to be at Menla around that same time,
Oh,
so we'll see.
no, good.
Yeah,
So then it could be a hybrid. Some student could find you at Menla, maybe.
yeah,
Oh,
potentially,
that'd be
yeah,
good. Oh, that'd be
yeah.
good.
We're still
So
working. We're still
it
working
would
on
be a hybrid. You know, it's amazing what Riverside and Zoom have enabled to
that.
happen now with this terrible, terrible catastrophe of the COVID. But
Yeah, exactly.
it's been upping our game. Everyone has had to up their game in a certain way, learning and teaching and managing in spite of the catastrophe. And it's good that we learn to deal with catastrophes because they're more. I hope the fire you stay safe. I pray that you stay safe. Please
Yeah,
invoke
thank
the the fire deities up there in Grass Valley. You know, you and Jaidev. You know, I really hope. You know, there Greenville, is that far from you? I hope not near.
you. Greenvale.
Yeah, Greenville apparently is one town of 1,400 people that was completely wiped out up in northern, you know, in that area.
I'm not sure, but I mean, I'm looking out my window and the sky is white from smoke.
Yeah,
So
that might be.
there is a
Apparently
fire.
three towns. There have been in the last week. There 3 towns went totally under. I mean,
Yeah,
100%, not just a couple of houses, completely
yeah,
wiped out.
exactly.
I'm so worried about it. Really, I am. We have to pray for you,
Yeah,
Tokyonten Gumbo, Medicine Buddha. Please send the rain. But you know,
yeah,
oh, the last
yeah,
thing you know, then the people studying with
yeah.
you and yogis and people who maybe like me, oh, I want to meditate and I don't want to learn about medicine. You know, like I was in 1964 when my
Yeah.
wise Mongolian guru, teacher, he never wanted to be my guru, so he refused to be guru, but he was my spiritual friend, let's say, spiritual
Mm,
mentor. He,
yeah.
they will learn a lot about their meditating and about the Dharma and about
Yeah.
how it connects to the body. And, you know, in Zen, they say you have to learn to meditate with the body, you have to read with the body. They say, well, it'd be nice to know what your body is.
No
And
doubt. And actually
that
that
course
is
will
some
definitely tell them. What's that?
yeah. So that is I think that's a really important point of when Dharma traditions get translated, there are other aspects of culture which were not necessarily translated. And
Mm-hmm.
I think the establishment of various Dharma traditions in the West without, for example, the medical traditions or some of the other cultural, social elements, there's elements that are missing, that are just
Yeah.
implied.
Yeah.
And yeah, definitely in this course it is, and especially so this course is actually the first module of what is
medicine training program.
Right, right.
And then as the modules go on, then things get more elaborated and go deeper into the study of understanding the body and the body's energetics and so on. But yeah, in this tradition, there's also a lot of discussion on what types of meditation affect our body and our energy and our minds in different ways. And I think that context can be a very useful thing, whether for yogic practitioners, meditators, even athletes. In general, we need, there's a certain language of understanding the qualities of our health and qualities of our life, which is often missing. And it's quite simple, actually. Just understanding the 5 elements and hot and cold and the 3 humors, and even on a basic level, then we can choose what type of practice to do, or what type of food to eat, or other ways we can simply adjust our lifestyle and adjust our life to enable us to be more effective and to live in health.
Wonderful. Well, Dr. Eric Rosenbush, thank you so much for this wonderful conversation. I learned some really good things, I think, from you just in this. I wish I had time to take the course. Maybe I'll try to drop in since it'd be online. I can try to listen in here and there to refresh my mind about that and learn some new things. And everyone is welcome to join this. And you sign up through Menla Online, I guess, is the main way you do, to www.menla.org and /online, I think something like that. Okay, and you can have a life-changing way of re-envisioning your body with this study with my venerable friend and teacher of this medical tradition, Dr. Eric Rosenbush. And thank you so much for giving us your time and this friendly and wonderful conversation. Okay?
Thank you so
How's that?
much, Bob. It's always such a pleasure to see you, and thank you for taking the time to speak. For embarrassing me,
No.
it's very much the other way around. I am very much your student, but thank
No,
you for,
no, you're my teacher. The point is, everyone can be a teacher, but when you have great knowledge like you do, and a great heart in the knowledge, and your yogic connection to it, and this is like a huge thing. Western doctors, they don't realize that becoming a doctor is a spiritual training. And they should realize that. And how are we going to have a decent health system? It isn't just changing the Medicare. It's like doctors themselves, when they're educated, they should be cultivating their wisdom and compassion. There's a scientific element in that is really critical to them. And you really do teach that, and you exemplify it in your life. And I therefore am honored, and we at Menla and Tibet House are honored that you teach with us and for us. And we are happy to introduce this to the students, okay? So all the best, okay?